Derek Chauvin, the Minneapolis police officer convicted of murder and manslaughter in the death of George Floyd in May of 2020, still faces significant legal challenges. There are, of course, his appeal of his judgment, where he is going to argue that there were several undue influences on the judge, on the jury, on the court process in general, that there was misconduct by the state, that there was a juror who lied on his juror intake form and had a pre-existing prejudice to the position by attending an anti-cop rally in Washington, D.C. and being photographed wearing a shirt that said, "Get your knees off of our necks," and then failing to disclose that when he was specifically asked about it at the jury selection process. All of these things combined make for some interesting sort of questions on the motion for a mistrial and the appeal of the rejection of that motion for a mistrial. But we're not talking about those issues today. We're actually talking about the upcoming federal civil rights charges that Derek Chauvin faces in relation to the death of George Floyd. And those charges carry a potential life sentence in prison. So we need to talk about what the strategy is that's sort of being hinted at here, what it means for Derek Chauvin, and what isn't being said by some of these articles. Let's get into it. I'm Nick Rekieta of Rekieta Law, a small law firm in central Minnesota. I'm a lawyer. I'm also a legal and political commentator on YouTube and on Odyssey. Wherever you're watching, go ahead, hit like, hit subscribe, turn on your notifications, and make sure you don't miss any videos. Okay. What are we talking about here? This is an article from the New York Post. It'll be linked down in the description below if you want to check it out for yourself. But we're going to quickly take a look at it and talk about what's going on here. Derek Chauvin is reportedly close to reaching a plea deal on civil rights charges. Now, again, these civil rights charges carry a potential life sentence, and a plea deal on them has some different implications that need to be discussed. Let's see what the article says here. Killer ex-cop Derek Chauvin is close to reaching a plea deal on his federal civil rights charges that would allow him to escape life in prison for George Floyd's murder, according to a report. Now, the two civil rights charges he faces in regards to George Floyd are that he, under color of law, unreasonably impaired George Floyd's right to be free from an unreasonable seizure in which he held him down on the ground. He seized him. He was arrested for the purposes of the Fourth Amendment. It was a seizure of the person, and that was an unreasonable use of the seizure power, and unreasonable force was used in effecting that arrest. And then the other federal civil rights charge he faces is a failure to render aid to someone in his care. So this is similar to the negligent homicide sort of approach, but this is that when you are in custody by an officer of the state, you have a right to be provided emergency medical care when it is needed. And they say that Derek Chauvin, along with the three other officers, failed to render such aid and care when they should have. Now, of course, he was provided some level of medical care when the EMT showed up, but this is what the charges are saying about their specific actions, that failure to render aid and care would actually contributed to the death of George Floyd and deprived him of that civil right. So those are the charges that he is facing. And based on the underlying convictions and the evidence presented at trial that was used to make those convictions, it seems like the feds might have a decent case here. Multiple sources told WCCO that the former Minnesota officer is close to the deal that would see him serving his sentence in federal prison, but at the same time as the 22 and a half years he already got on his state conviction for murdering Floyd in May last year. So what he's looking for is concurrent service of his sentences, so that all of his sentences would be served at the same time. So he would only serve the 22 and a half years total and not have a separate consecutive sentence that would follow that 22.5-year sentence. He also wants to spend his time in federal prison rather than state prison, probably because as a state police officer, he thinks his chances would be better maybe in a federal prison out of state. I'm not sure what his specific reasoning is, but that's one that kind of makes sense. It would include the 45-year-old former cop having to finally explain what he did to Floyd and why he did it, WCCO said. The deal would likely involve a 20 to 25-year sentence that he would serve at the same time as his state sentence. WCCO sources said, without it, Chauvin faces life in prison on the charges, the outlet noted. Now, he's not necessarily going to get life in prison if he is convicted of these civil rights charges. It is certainly possible that he would, but that's not necessarily the outcome. So the negotiations with prosecutors could be what Chauvin was referring to when he told his sentencing hearing last week that he could not give a full statement because of legal matters. Quote, there's going to be some other information in the future that will be of interest, and I hope these will give you some peace of mind, end quote, Chauvin had said, which WCCO suggested was the plea deal. It's very, very possible that is what they're referring to. But what they're not really saying here, is that if he takes a plea deal on the federal charges, if he does, that basically means he's not going to be appealing his underlying criminal charges in Minnesota. And that may actually be a part of the plea deal, is to go ahead and forego his ability to appeal the decisions. And that can be included as part of a federal plea agreement. Plea agreements in general are basically a contract, a promise of you to do a set of things and a promise of the state to do a set of things. The only thing that they can't do is promise illegal things. You can't promise to do something illegal, and the state can't ask you to do something illegal in regards to your plea agreement. But giving up your right to an appeal is potentially part of the plea agreement there. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because if you're going to get a 22 or 25-year federal prison sentence, appealing your 22.5-year state prison sentence doesn't really do anything if they're being served at the same time. If they're being served at the same time, you're going to have the whole thing come out anyway. So there's a very real possibility that we will not see an appeal of Derek Chauvin's conviction, that he will simply accept his time in prison and that will be the end of it. And I think that might make people a little bit upset, people who have supported him kind of from day one and his position on this. So I'd love to hear what you guys think down in the comments about this decision, about the potential of this decision, that he may be giving up his rights to an appeal. And even if he doesn't expressly give up his right to an appeal, he's effectively doing so by accepting federal prison time that is the same as his state prison time. I mean, both of these things would end up with roughly the same result if the reports are to be believed. And one final note, it's important to remember, I don't know if everybody knows about this or remembers this, but 3 days after the death of George Floyd, Derek Chauvin was actually ready to plead guilty to third-degree murder. He was ready to plead guilty to third-degree murder, and that deal was actually stifled by then Attorney General William Barr. Yes, that is U.S. Attorney General William Barr, because part of the plea agreement would have included avoiding pushing the federal civil rights charges and just settling it out. He would have spent over 10 years in federal prison. That was the plea deal he tried to strike just 3 days after George Floyd had died. However, it was again scuttled by Bill Barr. Because Bill Barr said he did not want to see riots and protests and all of that stuff. Well, of course, that ended up happening anyway, and so maybe that was not the best decision. However, the state did get a longer conviction for Derek Chauvin than the 10 years he was originally trying to plead guilty to. And so maybe the state there kind of lucked out, I guess. But Derek Chauvin sure got the short end of that stick. But it's important to remember that he has attempted to plead guilty in the past. I think a lot of people overlook that when they're analyzing his culpability in this stuff. But again, I'd love to hear what you guys think. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this to be interesting. And I haven't seen too many places suggesting that he may be giving up or even is effectively giving up his right to appeal his murder conviction. But let me know what you think. I'll talk to you then. Peace. Peace.